Hey everybody, welcome back to Sounds Like a Drum, Cadence Independent Media Production. If you're just joining us, here we talk about tone and tuning and myth busting and hacks and things like that. And today, this is kind of all of those things at the same time. It's sort of a throwback to one of our very early videos when we talked about the versatility of a single snare drum. Now we're talking about how many kits are in your kit. A drum set is a lot of drums. It's many instruments kind of mushed together to create one thing that makes a larger voice together. And I've had a few in my life. Some of us have had only one, it varies a lot. But the curious thing about them that is true of most instruments is that there's things you can change without changing the drums that can completely change the sound of the kit. And in the case of what we're doing today, we're not actually going to change any of the heads or anything. It's just going to be tuning and a little bit of muffling to sort of uncover all the things that a simple 4-piece kit might be able to offer you. We're using this kit today. It's the House Drummers World Nesting Kit, which sort of goes along with what I want to show today, what we want to show, which is that these are also kind of small drums, but you can get a big sound out of them. You don't necessarily need the giant thing for the giant sound. Thanks again to ProMark by D'Addario for helping us out and being our presenting sponsor. We're using a couple different sticks today for different sounds, Michael Carvin's and then also Rebound Balance Acorn Hickory. And what we are looking at here is a 10, a 14, and an 18. So almost traditional kind of jazz sizes with a 10 instead of a 12. This kit's designed that way so they can go together kind of like Russian dolls. And then my Supraphonic that I just got yesterday, which I am enjoying very much and excited to get under a microphone. And we have outfitted everything with what I consider to be fairly versatile heads, which are G12 coated batters on the toms and the snare. We have clear G1s underneath the toms. We have a standard 3mm snare side on the snare. The bass drum today is sporting a frosted EQ4 batter, and the front is an EQ3 black. And what we're looking at is what all can we do with this without changing the heads, just with tuning and a little bit of muffling, and specifically external muffling. We're not going to take a head off and put a pillow in it. We're not going to do anything more invasive than just stuff on top of the heads. The first place we want to stop for this is kind of like a medium, meaty, big sound on the low side of things. And again, these aren't huge drums, so you might look at them and be like, I don't know if they can do it. But in a lot of situations, whether it's a smaller room and you don't need to project that much acoustically, or if you're in a mic situation or a recording situation, an 18 can be a legit bass drum. 10s are versatile, 14s are very versatile. A 14-inch floor tom might be the most versatile tom in a kit, in my experience anyway. And a 5x14 metal snare, you can't really go wrong with that. First out of the gate, this is no muffling, medium tuning, and I was basically just aiming for a big sound with ring and sustain that's going to fill the room. just to be totally clear, there's nothing in the bass drum, there's nothing in or on the toms, the snare, nothing. So that does sort of put us in a position where maybe we need to play off the bass drum and not vary the beater to get the maximum amount of low end. We need to make sure we're playing into the drums and getting away so we're not choking them out, you know, really utilizing the rebound. Playing pretty hard, you could play soft too. It's gonna sound good, but that's like kind of a, I don't know, average kind of sound to me for like pop and rock music, maybe a little boomy, but nothing too crazy. Now, that's the sound of big drums to me, and these are small drums. So now we're gonna, just through tuning, we're gonna go from that to a kind of higher jazz or world music kind of tuning that might be useful for Afro-Cuban stuff and different things like that, where maybe you're gonna be playing at lower volumes or you're gonna be playing busy at a very low volume in particular, and you need that kind of articulation. So the primary thing that's happening here is everything's getting pitched up, and I'm also pitching the batter head slightly above the Resos on the toms. And then the bass drum, well, actually the bass drum's the same thing. The batter's gonna be a little higher than the Reso, but everything is coming up. And that is basically to just get enough stiffness out of the batters that we can get that low volume articulation. And then there's bloom in the bottom heads for when we hit really hard so that we can move a little extra air. But when we're moving less, we're still getting a clear sound. Now, I know that a lot of people are really concerned about exact pitches, whether it's the overall pitch of the drum or the batter pitch or the Reso pitch or relative pitches. And I'm going to keep saying the same thing, which is that the pitches I'm using, I'm just finding with my ear. I don't recreate tunings. I have a drum in front of me. I just put these heads on, and I don't say to myself, this is an A, and that's a G, or anything like that. I hit it, and I tune, and when it sounds good, I stop. The one thing I will do is I will aim for my snare to be the highest voice rather than the rack tom, even if it's a 10, which can get a little bit tricky sometimes. And I like a fourth between the two toms, a perfect fourth interval. And I don't use a tuner for that. I just listen to it. It's a sound that I'm used to, and there are lots of sort of like songs you can picture that have that interval as the first, you know, the Here Comes the Bride melody or different things like that. It's not about right intervals, and it's not about correct tuning. What it is the sound and the feel working for you or not? It takes a lot of experimentation. I've done that. Lots of us have done that. I encourage you to just do that and find your thing, because people do jazz with low-tuned toms, and people play rock with high-tuned toms, and funk music too. Mike Clark, I love Mike Clark, and he tunes high, man, with the, you know, everybody. So just don't sweat it too much. It's really not that important. The important thing is that you listen when you're tuning, and I totally understand that if I told you, you know, TuneBot numbers and things like that, you could get these two intervals, but it might not work on your drum. And I don't like the idea of people thinking that the numbers are the sound, because every drum is different, every edge is different, head combinations are different. If you like pinstripes instead of G12s, whatever, man, like, it's totally okay, but the numbers aren't gonna fly. They're just not. So that's my spiel. Take it or leave it, you know, that's just where I'm coming from. All right, so that's some stuff that I just sort of was inspired to play because of the sound of these drums, you know, kind of warming up and getting a sense of it. They feel real different than they did before, so it takes a moment to kind of get used to just the tactile sensation of it. But the sounds are really, really different. I didn't change bass drum beaters. I didn't do anything except tuning. But the main thing is I listened and I tuned and I tried things. We even recorded it a little bit, and one of the toms sounded a little dicey, and I messed with it some more. And got to a spot where it felt like a family, it felt like they worked together, had some fun, and now this can also be a versatile tuning too. You know, you can use this for a lot of different things, especially if you're going to do mallet stuff, if you're doing singer-songwriter stuff with mallets. Having a little bit higher tuning is going to give you response at lower volumes, and especially with things like timpani mallets or maybe like broomsticks, things like that. Now, let's do something kind of experimental. We were talking about doing super dead drums, like almost like a dub kind of thing. So if we're going with this sort of idea that we're not going to put anything in the drums, we're going to tune and maybe put stuff on top of the heads at most, thinking about a gigging or recording scenario where you kind of have to do this stuff quickly, pitch the drums way down, little bit of muffling on the batters. I didn't muffle the bass drum at all because that's a little bit tricky to do on the fly. You can use a towel against the batter head, that kind of thing, but really, if you really drop the batter head super low, you'll get down into a drier kind of sound anyways. A little bit of gaff on the rack tom. I gaff taped a cymbal felt to the floor tom. I did my sort of handkerchief thing on here, and I also put a handkerchief inside of the hi-hats, which is like a Carly Barrett thing. Other people have done this. It takes a lot of the high end out and makes for a really dry hi-hat sound, which is super cool for reggae and dub. It's also just a hip thing in the studio if you have super bright or super loud hi-hats and you need to get rid of some of the high end. It makes them sound like different cymbals. So as you'll see, here we go. Experimental sounds. Wasn't sure what was going to happen. Fussed around exactly as I would on a session if somebody was like, hey, we want the drums to kind of have this sort of vibe. You just experiment and see what it does. But the neat thing about this is that I didn't change any heads. I didn't use anything that would have cost money. This is stuff that's laying around oftentimes in our cymbal bag or at a venue or at a studio, or you can kind of put together a kit of things like cymbal felts and gaff tape and bring a handkerchief with you. All that kind of stuff is easy to bring and easy to have. It's relatively inexpensive if you are buying it, and you can really dramatically alter the behavior of your drum set this way. Now, it is trickier to modify the bass drum, but in my experience, the bass drum is the thing that I change the least amount of the time. The snare probably gets the middle amount of treatment, and the toms are the things that end up getting fussed with the most because they're so often either central to the beat or they're punctuation marks, basically, in the music and fills and things like that, so they do jump out, and oftentimes the fills might be a little compressed, or you might be playing specific fills that go to the song, that kind of thing. So making sure that the character of them is interesting, memorable, musical, maybe weird, maybe growly, whatever is working that day. Now, any kit that you're going to get into this kind of like how versatile is it type scenario, you're going to run into certain limitations no matter the kit. If I had a 24 and a 13 and a 16, it would be a different set of problems and a different set of awesomes about the kit. The tricks with this kit are that it likes high tunings, almost a little too much. It can get a little bit over-sustainy with the thin maple shells and the kind of sharp bearing edges. So you have to sort of tune with that in mind, that you don't want things to get too much like a chord or like a tonal center in the kit that's going to clash with maybe one tune and then not the next. Conversely, going super duper low, this bass drum really likes being tuned super duper low. Floor tom, a little bit fussy. It gets a lot of sustain when it's tuned super low. And that's another thing where, like, if it's a G sharp and the song's in G, got to be careful. But if it's a G sharp and the sustain is super short, it's not really going to get in the way. It's more about how long that note's going to be there. We discovered today that this rack tom is fundamentally louder than the floor tom, and it's also closer to overhead mics, etc. So there's a little bit of work you have to do to balance out the just throw of those drums. And you might have the opposite. You might have a really kind of relatively dead rack tom and a super crazy floor tom. It could be anything. The snare just sounded good because it does. And the other thing that I didn't do today that I would normally do in a situation like this where I was trying to go really dramatic is I would have a selection of bass drum beaters with me. I would have wood, round felt, a standard DW, and like a bomber, like a big fluffy beater of some sort. And all of those things can either be because the song needs a certain sound, or they can be to quickly alter the behavior of the bass drum to make your life easier. Like in a really bright room, you can use the fluffy one, and then it's just easier to play. And anything that makes you easier and less tense is going to make the music better for sure. The sort of impetus for us doing this in the first place was talking about the idea of a jazz kit or a rock kit or any of those sorts of things. And if you go not even that deep into the history of the drum set, you can see that jazz kits have had 26-inch bass drums at certain times in history, and they've had 16-inch bass drums at other times. Similarly, like in the 90s, there was an awful lot of 20-inch bass drums in rock music and little toms tuned really, really low. And now people are really into the Bonham thing and the big kicks and the shallow big kicks again. So all these things kind of come in and out of vogue, but at the end of the day, with a little bit of tuning and a little bit of expertise in your ears, you can get a lot out of most any kit. Now, if you're trying to do a bop gig, a 24-inch bass drum with big toms is going to be harder than a small kit that gets those sounds easier. But you could maybe have a couple of versatile setups that you can use, or what I've seen, which I think is brilliant, is one drum set with 2 or 3 toms and then 2 different bass drums. And then you can use your little bass drum and the 2 littler toms for one gig, and then just swap out 1 or 2 for another gig. I've seen a few guys do that, and it's brilliant. But at the end of the day, you can do pretty much anything with anything if you can get your tuning together and your touch together and your ears together enough to play appropriately and aim for sounds that'll fit with the music. I remember a great quote from Steve Gadd where people were asking him where he came up with the parts he played, and he just said, well, I listened to the music to figure out what it wanted from me, and then that's what I did. Tuning is the same thing. You can listen to the music and it'll tell you what it needs, and a kit will tell you what it likes and what it doesn't like, and you can force it a little bit, So that about wraps it up. So please like, comment, and subscribe, and click that little notification button down there so you get notifications when we put up new videos. It's 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time every Tuesday. Thank you again to our presenting sponsor, ProMark by D'Addario, for helping us out with the sticks. And I'm actually very curious, particularly about this, to hear what kinds of versatility people have managed to squeeze out of their drum sets. And also what you think the most versatile set of sizes is. I think that most snare drums will do a lot of things, but I've seen people be very specific in their choices about what toms and bass drum sizes they feel they can get the most out of. Steve Smith has opinions. My friends have opinions, everyone in between. So yeah, let us know, and we'll see you out there.